Welcome, everybody. I'm Glenn Ruga from the Social Documentary Network and ZEKE magazine. And it's fantastic to see so many people here today, so many faces from all over the world. People are still coming in to the room. And people are both in the room live, as well as watching this live on YouTube. And a few housekeeping announcements before we get started. Your microphones are off by default, and we prefer if you keep them off unless you're asking a question or making a comment later. And during the question and answer period, if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand using the raise your hand function in the participant section. And we'll talk more about how to do that when we get to the Q&A section. Your videos are on by default so that we can see you. You're welcome to turn them off, but we prefer if you keep them on so that we can see you. It's nice to see all these faces out there. And the schedule for the day is that each speaker will speak for approximately 10 minutes, and then we'll go into a question and answer with the entire group. And when the question and answer period is over at around 2:15, the formal meeting will end and the live video will end. But we're going to try an experimental thing, which is breaking out into breakout rooms. And what that will do is that we'll create about 15 to 20 breakout rooms, and you'll each be in a room with other participants, and we'll give you a suggested question that you can talk about. But what that will allow you to do is to talk in a much smaller group with people about what you've been listening to today. And then when that's over, after 10 minutes, we'll all come back into the larger group. So we're very privileged to have three fantastic guests with us today. The first is Ed Kashi from the 7 Photo Agency. Ed is a renowned documentary photographer, photojournalist, filmmaker, author, and educator, and is also a mentor to many in the documentary community. Ed has given so much of his time and energy to help nourish this community and encourage a generation of documentary photographers. And I also want to thank Ed for his participation on the SDN Advisory Committee for the past 10 years. Next is Susan Meiselas, who needs no introduction. Susan is an important voice, if not the most important voice, in the documentary community. She's been a member of Magnum Photos since 1976 and went on to publish her seminal book, Nicaragua, in 1981. And I want to take this opportunity to say to Susan that this was an extremely important book for me back when it was published, to make me aware about the power of visual storytelling through photography. And Susan is also the founder and president of the Magnum Foundation. And we're very fortunate to have a special guest with us here today, Beth Flynn, deputy picture editor at the New York Times, overseeing a staff of 35 photo editors and 15 photographers. Beth, if you're here now, can you unmute your microphone and say hello? Yeah, Beth is, as you can imagine, at the New York Times, is extremely busy, and hopefully she will join us. I guess she's not with us now. So it's a remarkable situation that the world is in today, that we find ourselves in, unprecedented in our lifetime. Never before has the planet experienced the same conflict at the same time like we are today. We're in uncharted territory. We don't know when this will end, and we don't know what our communities will be like afterwards. If there are sides in this battle, it is only the disparities of infection and death, often determined by race and class, as is too often the case. Our heartfelt appreciation goes out to those who still go to work every day in the markets and places of business that are still open, and who take public transportation to get to these jobs. And also to the first responders and healthcare professionals who work tirelessly at great personal risk to keep us safe and to provide care to those inflicted during this extreme test of the human spirit. Photographers have always been on the front lines of conflict ever since Matthew Brady photographed the US Civil War, Roger Fenton, the Crimean War, and more recently, Anya Nearinghouse covered the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Many have died while working to document truth and evidence about war. Robert Capa, Nick Oot, and Eddie Adams have taken some of the most memorable images in photographic history. The two photographers with us today, Ed Kashi and Susan Meiselas, know battle firsthand, and they also know the heights of human courage and compassion. The question today is, what does the coronavirus pandemic mean for the photographers in this battle? How do photographers stay safe, keep their subjects safe, and still take meaningful photographs? And what does the visual landscape look like today? It is with this background that I turn this over to Ed Kashi, and we'll take questions following all three presenters. Ed?
Okay, welcome. Thank you, Glenn, Susan, Beth, Marissa, everyone here. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully I'll get this right. There we go. All right. Do you see an image?
Yes.
All right. So you know, Glenn and folks, in answering this question, first of all, I just hope that everyone's safe and your loved ones in your community are doing okay. You know, I don't know about you guys, but you know, I go in and out in my mood, in my sense of well-being, and you know, some days are definitely easier than others. Today has been a rough one so far, but we'll bull through this. You know, the impact it's had on me certainly is now I'm unable to travel. I had a lot of work that was canceled. And so the way I've decided to react to this is by working hyper local, because for me, it's impossible to stop being engaged with the world. And while, you know, I probably spend 8 months out of the year normally traveling around the country, around the world, you know, I've also done a lot of work over the course of my career in my own home and you know, locally. And under normal circumstances, I find it very hard to work locally. I don't know, Susan, how you feel, but because I have my life, I'm in my life, and it's hard to juggle doing documentary work when you're, you know, trying to get home for dinner and take care of kids or go to a movie or whatever it may be. But anyway, in this case, because we have more time, it's easier for me to have dived into doing local work. There's two basic themes that I'm pursuing. One is a personal project looking at what I'm calling rising to the call, you know, because also in the work that any of us do, we need.
Ed, can I stop you for 1 second?
Sure.
We're having a problem here, and the problem is that we have an account to allow more than 300 people, and I've just been informed that it stopped us at 100 people. I just want you to know that we're going to have a lot of people who are trying to get in who can't, and I don't know what we can do about it in the middle of a meeting right now. And hopefully these people will follow us on YouTube.
Can they see this live? Can you direct them all to YouTube Live? Will that work, Glenn?
I have no way of directing them now, other than that the email that went out told them that. One person who's trying to get
It's in the post, and it also, I mean, people are also dropping out. So I was refused access at first, and I went back a few minutes later and I got in. Yeah. So I think you just have to carry on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all we can do. So
interesting dilemma to have. All right, Glenn, we'll just have to do this again. That's all. No.
Yeah. All right, Ed. I guess please continue. Sorry.
All right. So anyway, you know, it's so I'm pursuing a project where I've been photographing quite a lot, looking at either individuals or businesses or organizations in New Jersey. I'm in Montclair, New Jersey, 12 miles west of Manhattan, and looking for how people are rising to this moment and volunteering or in some way altering what they normally do to address the situation and give back. And you know, I normally don't get to work on themes like this, so it's given how sort of scary and sad or depressing it can be at times, you know, life can be right now. It's a nice project to be working on. But what I want to share with you this morning or today is another more personal project looking, basically I'm calling it Going Viral, my coronavirus diaries. And I've been working for about a month on this. And it's really a stream of consciousness, everyday kind of thing, just either things that are happening outside that I witness, or mostly things in my own home. And of course, one of the great outcomes is it's made me really appreciate my wife, Julie Winokur, more than ever. In the 29 years we've known each other, we've never spent more time together. And I'm happy to say we're getting along really well. So anyway, but she's also extraordinarily tolerant. So this is an image, one more, I'm waking up every morning. I don't know about you guys, and I'm going through like this checklist. Can I breathe? Am I coughing? Do I have a fever? Can I smell? And once all of that is settled, then it's like, all right, now I'll face the day. And a couple of weeks ago, I made this image. It was about 5 a.m. I don't know about you guys, but I'm an early riser. And some days I wake up really early, and I made this image. And, for me, photography has always been not just a way to sort of create my memory, but also and to engage with the world, but also to sort of like confirm or affirm that I am here. There's something about making images, because you have to be in the time and space when something happens or you witness something. This image. And, sorry. So anyway, so this is an image of the railroad tracks to New York City, which are only 12 miles away, as I said, but boy, they feel a million miles away today. It feels like a foreboding place to go to. And just to give you background, I mean, where I am, we're sort of right on the edge of the epicenter of the epidemic, I think in the world right now, but certainly in the United States. And so this is my family, like many of you. I hope you're staying in touch with your friends, your loved ones, especially folks who are living alone. So our son's in San Francisco, our daughter's in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And then also keeping in touch with some of my crazy friends. This is Tom LaFay in Colombia, in Bogota, Colombia, a dear friend and colleague. You have to figure out ways to stay connected, blow off steam, share both, the fears and the joys you may be having at this moment. This is Julie, my wife. We were in line at a Trader Joe's. The sun came out and she was basking in that moment. I'm learning a lot about Julie. She said to me about a week and a half ago, we were having dinner and she looked at me and she was like, I was made for this moment. And she was like, I had a feeling that something like this would happen in my lifetime. And I'm convinced that she feels that way because she's the child of a father who grew up during the Depression. And there's almost something in her DNA. So this is her working from home. She's obnoxiously creative and productive, making masks for all our neighbors, tending to her new sprouts that she'll plant in her garden, our garden, because I finally, after 16 years, started to work with her on the garden. So there are some positives coming out. But then, this is Brenda, my studio manager, and someone who is so dear and close to me, but she can't come into work anymore. She was coming to drop off a hard drive. So again, for me, this visual diary is as much about creating memories as it is about capturing moments that make me feel alive, that in some way make sense of the time that I'm living through. Another way that I've decided to devote the extra time that I normally don't have is to volunteer at a local food kitchen. Of course, I'm making images here and there as I'm doing that volunteer work. I find that incredibly rewarding. And, as I keep on saying to people, if every day I do at least one thing that has meaning or purpose, then I feel better about what's going on, all around me. This was in line at a pharmacy. I love this guy still taking the moment to stretch and exercise. Then about 10 days ago, a neighbor who literally lives across the street from us died. He was in his early 60s. My daughter grew up with his daughter. And so we held a vigil for him, for his wife. This was the Sunday before last. And that's Julie. About 30 people came out on the block and held candles. And then his wife came out and addressed us. And we all just started sobbing. And it was a very emotional moment. But then 2 days later, in literally the exact same spot on earth, this happened. Our other neighbor had a birthday party for their 4-year-old son, and they somehow convinced a 6'7" Darth Vader to come and entertain the party. So again, this is a sort of cycle of life. These moments we're going through of what can be devastating loss or tremendous fear, but there can also be moments of joy. And I find that most of my joy, apart from when I'm working, most of my joy comes from the connection to other people, and not just Julie, who I'm living with, but the people around me, my friends, even if it's done virtually. That's it. Thank you. Susan, you're up.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Ed. Still trying to get Beth in here. But,
Okay. Do I need to stop sharing, or will you do that?
I'll do that now.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm continuing to share, and I am doing it somehow. Let's hope like this. Whoop. Like this. Oh. We've had this all worked out. Sorry. So it's funny, Ed, because we're kind of in seesaw moments. I think I'm in a different, somber in a different way. But I was thinking of, Ed and I have taught many years with our fellows, and been in the field a little bit together, places not in the same time. Places like Kurdistan, which are pretty remote and connect us in different ways. It's been hard for me to pull together even a set of pictures to share these feelings. I think and to be somewhat public when I feel very private in the shadows. I kind of want to remain there. But, some of what you just said, Ed, about most of us, some of us not all of us on this call have been or hope to again be global travelers. And knowing that we're, when we are in the world, it's where we feel we most belong. It's where we carry our relationships to and from. And most of our insight comes from those encounters, the immersion, this gift of engagement that we've had, many of us, all our lives. And it's big to let go of the desire for it again. This is a picture that I made in Sweden. I was in Europe to give a talk. It was the second week of March. I dared to go, even though many people said, you shouldn't leave. They could close the borders. And of course, I've heard those kinds of threatening warnings in life before. I tend to go where others leave from. But reading and hearing about Corona was peculiar there because Sweden at the time was still totally socializing. And what we were hearing about in Italy didn't look like anything that we could imagine in Sweden. And the next day, I was completely shocked to go to the airport in Stockholm, and it was in total shutdown. So of course I got back to New York. I was probably a day before the threatening words, if you don't come now, Americans, you may never get back. And I went into complete self-isolation for a couple of weeks. I had someone here going out and fetching food, foraging for toilet paper, all of that. But as some of you know, I'm also living a kind of double life. And in a way, the double life is what's kept me going. And a lot of that is letting go of the need or the necessity that my own work is becoming less important in my own pictures, less important to me than making connections with this global community that the Magnum Foundation has been supporting for over a decade. And truthfully, I feel like I've been listening more than I've been looking at what's happening around me these last weeks. So I'm thinking a lot about just what does it mean to have a space where people come together, and who knows when we'll have it again. and that just that dynamic, incredible, unpredictable energy exchange, the richness of that. And of course, though we're shifting to online learning and it's very efficient, this sense of loss, I feel a lot of sense of loss. Part of how we responded was to, I hope you're not seeing my scene you. I hope, I guess the sense of urgency came that these diverse voices had to find some channel. And so fortunately, the Nation online gave us that opportunity. And, you know, from a kind of mentoring process, it's been a real learning process to edit with some of the fellows from New York to a Nation onto the globe, which is a whole projection. We're focusing on the invisible workforce that keeps us safe. This is Cynthia Briones, Santos Briones, who's been working and really is sharing a kind of unique experience through her dialogue with caretakers and nannies and out of work migrants. And it's a back and forth through WhatsApp that she's in conversation with them under the conditions they're living. And that's this week on the Nation. And next week, whoop, we're not advancing. Next week is Arlene Mayorado, who's from LA, who spent time with volunteer food workers, I guess like you, Ed. They're small organizations. These are really the first responders to a complete economic inequality crisis. And of course, they are serving their own communities that have been neglected. And that will be next week. And then we'll go on from there. I'm looking out my window, walking, you know, putting out the garbage. And of course, I'm seeing in Little Italy, where I've lived for 45 years, it remains completely desolate. All the luxury boutiques have closed down and the homeless are collecting bottles. And I'm feeling the contradiction of my own privilege. And of course, this unbridgeable distance between us. Around the corner, I used to live on Elizabeth Street. Mo, the local butcher, was my neighbor, and he was due to turn 96 this week, and he died in the hospital alone of corona. So it's quite beautiful to see this very personal community memorial to him. The flowers are changed each day, it seems, and like everyone, you know, we're living with loss, and the loss in particular to not be able to say goodbye. So each day really does get kind of longer between the sirens and the clapping at 7. So I guess like everyone, I'm living with this strange, weird feeling of witnessing, but mostly through mediation, waiting to hear the words of wisdom coming, knowing that my own eyes only see a fraction of the enormity of what surrounds us. And with all these images flowing, I still, you know, no one truly knows where we're heading, where will we be in weeks or months from now. And so this strange, you know, I've never spent so much time on TV and radio and just hearing these debates between whether or not we should be focused on lives or livelihoods. So I'm thinking a lot about, you know, what we can do beyond feeling or staying safe ourselves and sustaining ourselves. And I have to say the one probably positive I feel is participating in these 2 initiatives from photographers. The one on the right is from 100 local photographers joined by 100 global photographers to support the Bergamo Hospital. And they raised over, I guess that's about $800,000 in dollars. And it was initiated by a small lab in the region. And the Magnum photographers, along with Everyday Projects, last week raised nearly $1 million for Médecins Sans Frontières. So, you know, it feels like a gesture. It feels like something we can do, something different than making pictures, but that the pictures can do. And then struggling with this sense of what Zoom is all about, zooming in and out of a kind of illusion of connectedness, you know, to our families, to our communities, to the communities of others, to amazing ideas that are circulating and dropping into TED Connect and whatever else I never make time for. But, you know, I keep thinking that the really deeper challenge remains to feel truly interconnected, and this balance of the everyday and staying present, not panicking, not feeling complacency, but trying to live with tremendous uncertainty and yet with some sense of determination that we have to reimagine a world. And it's got to feel worth fighting for on the other side of Corona. So that's the space, the place, the mind that I can share with you now.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Ed. And I think Beth is with us now. Beth, can you unmute your microphone and say hello?
Yep, I'm here. Hello, everyone. I hope you're all well in
Great.
this dystopia we're all working through.
Yeah, sorry about the difficulties getting into the meeting. I'm glad.
Don't even worry. Therein is part of the working, right? How do we all connect in this you know, socially distant way? Also, I've got to leave my video off because I'm here with my kids and they are doing their online schoolwork, and so we're drawing down on our internet capacity.
Okay, Beth, I just want to make an announcement to people following us on YouTube now. If people were trying to get into the room and are now following us on YouTube, we apologize. We had an unexpected reduction in the maximum number of people who are allowed into the room, but I'm glad you're following us on YouTube. All right, Beth, so you're working at home now, like most of the rest of the world, and you have children at home, and you're responsible for photography at one of the leading media organizations in the world. So what it's like for you now, working at home under these circumstances?
You know, I mean, first, we've been practicing, interestingly, at the Times for this for the better part, not for a pandemic, obviously, but for the ability or disability, non-ability to work at home for, I would say, the better part of a year now. Mostly we did it for worst case scenario situations, right? Like a total power outage, or I suppose like a 9/11 or something like that. And so we have weekly rotations in which departments all work from home, and they're kind of surprise. We do them on a surprise run too. Like you get notified that morning that you're working from home, usually anyway. So it was pretty, we've had very few glitches. We've had very few pain points in the traditional way of it wasn't a first time for anyone when our mastheads, you know, made the decision for everyone to no longer come into the office. So that was a real luxury and actually a surprise set of circumstances that, you know, we didn't know that we had practiced.
So it sounds like you're up and running pretty well at this point then. That's good to see. And certainly the output at the New York Times demonstrates that.
Yeah, we're still able to, you know, we're still printing the paper. We're still, we've had no, you know, problems with the digital product. It's been great on that front.
So I'd like to share my screen in a minute from one of the articles from the Times, just the photographs from the article from Italy that ran on March 27th. We Take the Dead from Morning Till Night, written by Jason Horowitz with photographs by Fabio Bucarelli. So just give me a second while I bring this up. And Beth, if you can talk about your experiences with this. It's some of the most extraordinary photos that I've seen in the Times. So let me bring it up before we talk about it. So hold on a second. Okay. Yeah, I remember when this article ran. These are really some of the most extraordinary photos I've seen in the Times, certainly related to the current crisis. Can you just tell us a bit about what it was like working with a photographer and how the newsroom reacted when these photographs started coming in?
Yeah, I mean, this project came off of the Foreign Desk. And so David First and Craig Allen and Gaia Tripoli were the editors, the photo editors behind it. And so I don't have, I only have the broad strokes of how we put it together. But we had been wanting to do, Italy, before the United States was really struggling with an incredible amount of infection and death. And in a lot of ways, Italy was a precursor for what, might have happened here. And so we wanted to find a visual way to sort of show what was happening that we had been writing about, that, this country was really back on its heels on so many fronts. I mean, they called in the the police force to deal with the the number of dead, because the morgues were completely overrun and the hospitals were overrun, the morgues were overrun, the crematoriums were overrun. You can see in the photographs that the EMT workers and the ambulance workers and the hospital workers were going to homes when people called, for help, fully suited up. And that a lot of times, even people who were in really dire conditions, they wanted people to stay at home because the hospitals were so overrun. And Fabio was, suited up for this assignment as much as any of those workers were there. We made sure that he was fully, as fully protected as we could possibly make him doing this. And likewise with Jason Horowitz, the reporter.
And how did it come to be that he had this assignment to work on this?
A lot of, negotiation with Bergamo, the city and the hospitals and the EMT workers, between Jason and Fabio.
Let me just finish scrolling through these photos. Really powerful work. And it really became what happened in New York 3 weeks, a month later.
Yeah.
And let me share this other article that you had sent me, which is a lighter article about high school students in Omaha who they couldn't go to their prom, so they got dressed up, and the New York Times interviewed them and took photos. Can you tell us about this project a bit?
Yeah, so we have, this past year was the first year that we did, we had year-long fellows in the newsroom. We prior to this past year, we had internships, and we had come to the conclusion that the internships were not really working out as great as for the photographers, reporters, as we had hoped they would be, mostly because they were in the summer and 10 weeks and people are, on vacation and coming back from vacation. So this is Calla Kessler, who was one of our photographer fellows, and she was, she happened to be, she was in Omaha, which is her family home, before New York, before we shut down the office. And she was on vacation visiting her family, and had gone for an assignment and / vacation. And so she really wanted to stay there because, she just felt more comfortable. And so she has been coming up with these great ideas to do other things. And we've had actually some news assignments for her out there. We did a piece on a lab that was trying to, at the university, to try to disinfect hospital gear, but then we've also tried to do these sort of, I mean, lighter pieces, but that, you know, this is how this dystopia is affecting people. And sort of instead of doing just constantly doing hospital and death, but to talk about, like, you know, other ways this virus is impacting people's lives. You know, we have a weekly enterprise meeting where we're talking about, you know, other ways of telling this story, you know, unemployment, housing, you know, and then meditation, all sorts of projects that we can present to people that are still focused on, you know, what's happening in the United States, but some lighter stuff too. And I think, like, you know, people who are graduating middle school or graduating high school or graduating college and missing these moments that are, you know, a huge part of their lives. How are they feeling about that? What are they doing to combat feelings about that? What are they doing to engage with their, you know, fellow students who are going through the same thing? I think it's all really important to people to see that this isn't happening to them alone.
Yeah. So I read the Times every day, and, you know, it seems like reading the news, almost everything is coronavirus related, but not everything. From your perspective, what percentage of the work you think now that you're involved with is coronavirus related?
Oh my God. I mean, most, you know, even things that technically, I guess you could qualify as like not coronavirus, like the food section, you know, we're pivoting that coverage towards its usefulness for people in their current situation, right? Like, we're not going to do a restaurant review, right? We're doing more things like, you know, what you should have in your pantry, like what you should, you know, how to jazz up leftovers, or how, you know, easy meals to make for your kids at lunchtime, you know, things that are you know, are helpful in this time, and not just, you know, stuff that nobody can use. We are, you know, those feature sections in particular are pivoting more towards this kind of news, like travel, real estate, food, you know, styles, to make sense of the world around us right now.
All right. Well, thank you, Beth. Why don't we open this up now to the entire audience to ask questions? And if people would like to ask questions, please use the raise your hand function, which, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a button that says participants. And if you go in there, you should see something that says raise your hand. And hopefully this will work, and we'll take them in the order that hands are raised. All right, I see Laura. I don't see a hand. I don't see a last name, but Laura, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, I'm wondering if we are taking photos in our own communities, what can we do maybe on a larger scale to get our pictures out? Are there organizations that are maybe collecting images from, say, small towns?
Oh, that's a really good question. Right? That's, I mean, local news. Let me give that some thought. I mean, there's lots of, we're doing some user generated stuff, basically in areas that we can't, you know, you can't always get to people, like hospital workers and that sort of thing, and having them tell their stories, but local photographers being able to tell stories in their backyard. First of all, I'm happy to get any pitches. And I do my best to answer everybody. But let me think beyond that. I mean, Ed, if you have any ideas, pitch in. And if I think of anything after this too, I'll send it to Glenn, and maybe he can find a way to put it on the site.
Well, one question. I'm sorry, I don't know the name of the person who asked that, but what is your intent? Like, what's your goal in trying to get the work out?
Well, I'm a small town newspaper. I work for 6 different newspapers, all very small towns. And so I've been on assignment for this right from the start. So just wondering, how I can get my pictures out there so that a greater audience can see some of the work that I've done. I put some work up on my own personal page on Facebook. But yeah, just to, instead of just these images just staying on my computer forever, or they've been published, like I said, in our small town newspapers. But yeah, just to get other people to be able to see what's happening, outside of the hot spots. We've still got a lot of great things happening here that people should know about.
Where are you?
I'm in Rhode Island.
Rhode Island. Okay. Are you in a rural area or an urban?
Yeah, suburban and rural both is what our newspaper covers.
Okay, because there's the was it Everyday Rural America Instagram feed, and I know one of the people behind that. If that would be of interest to you, I certainly can connect you with her. They're always looking for more contributors, and I bet they don't have anyone in Rhode Island. But I think also within the group of publications that you're photographing for, they must have an online presence. So that is a way that I assume that your work is getting boosted beyond the people who might physically receive the papers.
Yes, it is. But it's still, I think, local people that are going into our own, newspaper website.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'd also like to add that the Social Documentary Network has a program now called Pandemic in Focus, which is exactly for this, for people taking work related to the Corona crisis to create galleries on our website, and we'll promote them through our social media and email. And actually, just 2 weeks ago, SDN, after 12 years, started a new program, a new policy where all new exhibits on the site are free. So we encourage people anywhere to create galleries of the work about the coronavirus, particularly, but about anything.
Also, I want to add the Ground Truth Project out of Boston. They're one of their big initiatives is getting local reporters throughout the United States. Sorry for the folks here who are not living in the United States. I don't want this to be an Amerocentric thing at all. But anyway, they could also be a source for you to get connected to, and I'm happy to do that as well.
And I see a comment on the chat about a program the Pulitzer Center for Crisis Reporting is doing. If you look at the chat, it's pulitzercenter.org, coronavirus-news-collaboration. Well, it's a long URL, but I believe if you go to the Pulitzer Center, you'll find more about that.
Yeah, and I would also just encourage you to be thinking of the immediate exposure and then thinking long-term, because the archive, what you're creating is an archive for history, and there will be people down the line who will value it. Yeah. So maybe it'll be local and maybe it'll be national. I mean, is the Library of Congress with Digital Humanities doing active collecting? If not, they should be. It's like maybe those kinds of initiatives will start to take shape. Now we see the scale of what's happening.
We certainly see what came out of the FSA 60, 70 years ago, what important archive of work that became.
But interestingly, the difference was FSA had Stryker assigning people to go out, and what's now happening is the reverse. And so it's this truly the democratization.
Yep.
See it on all these possible contributions, but the sourcing, the channels, everything's disparate. So who will bring it together? It's going to be the age of the curators.
Right.
Great. I see Allison Nordstrom has a comment. Allison?
Speaking of a curator.
Yes, speaking of curators.
Hi, I actually, what Susan said, of course, the issue of immediate dissemination is a real one. And it's important that we hear from small places as well as big places. But the idea of saving this material for future observers to deal with. And to me, the logical institution to do that with would be either your local historical society, every town has one, or your local public library, every town has one. The libraries are doing remarkable work in this time of crisis, of gathering information and disseminating information. Now, if you're in New York City, the Museum of the City of New York is aggressively acquiring exactly these kinds of photographs. So there's all sorts of issues about preservation, presentation, and organization that will make it easier for someone 100 years from now to understand what we're going through. And I think it's hugely important because they're going to know 100 years from now, they're going to know what happened after this in a way that we just can't. And this is a very modest, humble way to speak to people 100 years from now. So take those photographs, save those photographs, consult now with your local library to see what kind of format they want them in. Get started on that now, because it's really important.
Important comment, Iris. Thank you. Marianne? You'll need to unmute yourself, Marianne. Marianne, I see you with your hand raised, but we don't hear you. All right, sorry, Marianne. For some reason, it's not coming through. I don't know if that's Marianne Ashrafi, who's done remarkable work from Kurdistan, but glad you can be with us today, Marianne. The next person is Nicholas Murzov.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So this is more of a conceptual question. Anyone who feels they want to could maybe have a hazard at this, but so much of this is about invisibility, about the invisibility, obviously, of the virus, but also the absence of people, the absence of social life, the absence of the possibility of gathering. And it seems to me to pose a real question for all of us who are involved in engaging in visual cultures in the different ways, both as practitioners and as critics. How do we approach the invisibility of all this? So I'd be curious to hear if you had any thoughts in that regard.
Well, I think that is the fundamental question here. How do we photograph what's invisible and what we have to keep our distance from? But you know, some people have gotten close in full protective gear. Some people keep their distance. But any other comments on that question?
Well, I know that I'll say from some of the imagery I've seen, you know, being produced by other photographers, because I tend to want to photograph, you know, what I can see anyway. But I've seen some really innovative things. There's one photographer in Norway where she's, I don't know how she did it, but she's like photographed, you know, handrails, doorknobs, all these things we touch, and then somehow has figured out a way to, so this is more of a conceptual kind of imagery, sprinkle like dots of light on those spots as though that's the virus. And actually she's a mentee in 7 in the agency, and we're just like, wow, that is so cool. Carry on with that, you know? So, you know, depending on, you know, what your practice, what one's practice is, if you're more, you know, capturing, you know, reality, or if you're more of a metaphorical or conceptual photographer or artist, there's different ways to capture what you're so smartly alluding to, you know. I know the Times did a wonderful thing a couple of weeks ago on empty spaces around the world. I don't know if you saw that. Yeah. Yeah, so they tend to get to those things before everyone else, you know? So it pushes us to have to be more creative.
I thought the New York Times Magazine feature, I think last week, of medical workers in Italy was very powerful. And what they did was they photographed these people in their homes, so they weren't in healthcare settings, which were particularly dangerous, but they made very powerful portraits. I mean, they must have been fairly close to make these, but they got the same effect as if they were right in a hospital, and managed to do it really well. Okay. John Ray. Unmute yourself, John.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you now fine.
Yeah, I have a slightly more practical question. I, like Ed, lost a bunch of jobs at the beginning of the crisis. And I was wondering what y'all think is the best way to stay in touch with those clients for not knowing if it's going to be 1 month, 2 months, or 6 months before we get going again.
Good question, huh?
I'm at a total loss on how to keep that moving forward.
Well, I mean, I guess if you're talking about specific clients or folks that you had work lined up with that have now been canceled, it depends on how close you are, how good your rapport and relationship with them is. I mean, you know, at the very least, I'd like to believe that people will still deal with each other on a human level beyond the business stuff, you know, and that there is nothing wrong with reaching out and just saying, you know, how's it going, or you know, any sense of, I don't know, it's a tricky one. It's a really tricky one. I think it's really dependent on how good of a relationship you have with people. If you haven't bridged the human element and it's purely a business relationship, it might be a bit tougher in the midst of this to reach out to them, because it might just be too soon. But it also depends on the kind of work you were doing. If it involved photographing buildings or things, you know, that's different than if you're photographing intimate settings with people. So I hope that helps. And if anyone has a good answer, I'm going to take note of it too for myself. So.
Well, I'm less focused in a sense on clients so much, but there are relationships that I have with, you know, my museum shows are canceled or postponed for unpredictable time, and publications are delayed because, interestingly, Italy considers their printing industry an essential part of their business world. So those presses are going, but the publishing world is being you know, disrupted significantly, obviously, because all the books they published in the spring have not been seen. The bookstores are closed. They don't know whether or not how that's going to impact the fall lists. So I'm involved with people who have longer term projects. And even though they don't know when they will be realized, it's very important to keep these connections, even small exchanges every other week about where things might be going. So it's not quite like a client who you're trying to get an assignment from, but it's a relationship that you continue to sustain.
Regarding the publishing issue, ZEKE magazine is at the printer right now. They are functioning. And I believe here in the US, it's considered an essential function. And since ZEKE gets sent out through the mail, fortunately, the Postal Service is still functioning. Yeah. So yeah, we're doing okay on that front. Eric Ludy.
Hi, this has really been a great conversation, and I'm not sure if any of you saw I have a son who's a EMT, so I'm kind of close to this. Time did a great story on EMTs, which I was really glad to see. He had shared it out, called Heroes on the Front Lines. And it's been interesting actually for just to see some of my son, who's not at all a photographer, but to really see some of the behind the scenes stuff that our first responders are dealing with. And you know, I think the coverage that we're seeing out there is really impressive. And, you know, probably due to some rights of privacy, maybe they can't share all these photos, but be interesting to see what other projects are going to come out of this from our first responders. Because I think their viewpoint, because of everybody else's concern for safety and health, is really important. But I'm going to be curious to see what's happening. And Beth, I don't know if the Times is covering any more of this. I haven't seen. The only story I've seen, as I said, is the one in Time that my son shared with me.
Yeah, Chang Lee went out, oh gosh, maybe like 2 weeks ago now, in New Jersey with a EMT unit that was really well done. And then we have another one coming as well. I don't know how far out that is, but sort of the same. There's a guy who we know who is a EMT and also a photographer. So he's going to do a body of work, sort of first person.
Did you say that the one by Chang Lee has already been published?
Yes.
Okay.
If you search, let me see if I can find it. If you search Chang Lee, New York Times,
I think it was in Teaneck.
Teaneck.
I believe so.
Yeah, I think I can't remember the exact place.
Thank you.
Hang on,
That's great.
12. If you, yeah, it's Patterson, New Jersey,
Patterson.
with one T.
Yeah.
It was April 1st.
Thank you.
But point taken, Eric, that I think what we're going to see as the frontline work, is less demanding.
Yep.
A lot of storytelling that comes from the people that are the frontline workers, hopefully. I mean, what I loved about Cynthia's work is she's really in an engaged conversation with the nannies, photographing the worlds that they're in some ways trapped in. And so it's their perspective, and it's not just the photographer, observing, but the subjects participating in it in the way that we all know this medium has now created opportunities. So I think we're going to see a lot more of it.
Yeah.
Nick,
And actually, Elizabeth Chris just mentioned Rosa Mortem, who's in Baltimore. She's a nurse and she's a photographer, very good photographer. she did a piece, I think that was on the Nat Geo site as well, about a week or two ago, a very personal diary. But, because this past Wednesday, I was out with EMS volunteers for what I'm working on in a town near me. And by the way, Beth, they all loved that article by Chang Lee. They were all like, the New York Times did such an amazing job on that. So, which means something, it raises their spirits as well.
Yeah.
And these guys are volunteers. They're not getting paid. And anyway, it was, but one of the things I feel is I don't want to get in the way. So it's interesting, especially as I do this longer, I'm much more aware of how my presence might negatively impact the situation. And this is something we always have to pay attention to. But in this case, it's not only about my own personal safety, but that because we went on one scene on Wednesday night, and it was a 78-year-old woman who had heart failure, and the police show up. And, I've had that feeling of like, what am I doing here? I am on some level. Anyway, I think it's just really important to be cognizant of that, of covering these kinds of events, and therefore having healthcare practitioners who are already on the front line, whether they have photographic talent or not. In the case of Rosem and I think it was Andy Kim, I think, in the New York Times, they're actually really good photographers as well as being EMS workers.
Yeah, I just wanted to also say, Nick, I keep chewing on the question, and it's a difficult one, and it's a long-lasting one. But I was just thinking about the invisibility of the aftermath, and the invisibility of the pain that people are absorbing and assimilating, and then how that might play out in terms of an expression subjectively down. I mean, we're just, Eric, who I don't know, but is referring to there's so many people absorbing so much loss. And so the expression of the invisibility of the virus is going to have form in the future that could be visual. So it's not just the evidence of what we're seeing now or can't see now, but it's also thinking about that interior state. I think if it finds form, creating the form is going to be the challenge. Maybe in a photographic, or maybe other mediums that capture more the I don't know if it's poetry and novels or, other forms. Maybe the photograph is only partially able to really respond to the deeper place that so many people are dwelling.
All right, I'd like to try to bring Marianne Ashrafy back in again. Marianne, can you unmute yourself?
Is it okay now?
Yes, great.
Oh, great. Okay. Hi, everyone. I had almost the answer to part of my question, but I tried to rephrase it a bit more. I'm a freelance photographer, and of course, like everyone, we have problems with the work coming up. I was wondering if, because now we all realize how important it is to work as a community and collective. So is there a way that we can think of bringing a platform that for the freelancer who can join and in a way to push each other, share ideas and have some projects get going. Because if you're working alone and you know that there's no publication yet, you don't know who to reach, at some point you stop working. But if you are part of a community, that let's say 5 of us have this thing that we discuss with each other and work on and come back to each other after a week or so, in a way to have a platform for the freelancers to just share ideas and the projects till we get to the point that we can give it to a bigger archive or something.
Ed, do you have any response to that?
It's an interesting one. I will say, and this is also, Miriam, where are you?
You're muted,
You're
Mary.
muted.
I'm in Paris.
Paris, okay. Welcome. You know, Catchlight, the foundation, had just sent out a questionnaire because they're sort of trying to figure out that one of the things they're trying to figure out is what you're talking about, that given what has happened, and even in the best of times, we can use community and we can use exactly what you've just talked about, even in the best of times. So, but in particular now with what's going on, it's never been more crucial to have even just a small group of people, let alone a larger community, to reach out to and be a part of. So Catchlight, I would urge all of you to take that questionnaire because, you know, they're trying to compile very valuable data to try to figure out a road ahead and answer this question. I mean, being in Paris, you must know other photographers. I mean, there's such a healthy, big community of photographers. I would hope that you could at least reach out to your colleagues there. You know, I don't know the easy answer. I mean, Susan, you're a master of this.
I was just about to say there's also the online community through Visura, and I think they are a means by which you can organize your work, and you can also, it becomes more visible to others. There's a lot of interconnecting. So I would encourage you to look at that. Maybe Glenn can put this on a chat later or on the chat room. No, I mean, I think it's all of our rippling circles overlapping and finding ways to bring them together. We're doing a lot of talking about it, but whether or not we're finding single solutions or multiple strategies, I think you have to have multiple strategies. We're all freelance. Well, I don't know if everyone on this call is freelance, but I've certainly been freelance for over 4 decades. And, you know, it gives you the freedom and it gives you the challenge. You know, you have to be very entrepreneurial and think about how you know, choose the communities that you engage with. That's part of it. It's one step, one part of it.
And there's certainly the SDN platform. Marianne, you've had a lot of work on the SDN platform. It's a method for people to get their work out there.
Yeah. I used to always say, and I think Ed, and when we taught, you know, it's not just the work you do, but it's the space you create for the work that you do. It's not assuming that the work is the work. In fact, the work is not just the work. The work is all of these decisions about finding new ways to engage and create and imagine places where work can be. It isn't just the main channels. I think we can get lost if we're only thinking, as much as I defer to Beth, and it's fabulous what the New York Times has been resourceful enough to do, and the range of photographers they brought in who are much more diverse than they were certainly in the early days. So, you know, that's something to be optimistic about, but I think we have to find other strategies and not just rely on the single ones.
Yeah, that was an important consideration, certainly before the Corona crisis, and now it's more important than ever to how to create these communities.
So Glenn, I unfortunately am in a conflict, have to spin out. I'm really sorry not to be able to join chat rooms and
No, I understand, Susan.
more and more. I had a conflict of time, so I'm gonna sign off. I'm wishing everyone well, not just in their safety, but their spirits, and the challenge of coping with the not knowing, which most photographers spend a lot of time, at least analog photographers did, We never used to know what we made pictures of. You know, we waited and we were patient, and it was okay to not know. So we had to get back to the not knowing and trusting not knowing and finding our ways as we can. So.
All right. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan.
Okay, why don't we have one more question before we go into breakout rooms? Katya? And you'll need to unmute yourself, Katya.
You hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm wondering, and what do you think about idea of pitching now to editors projects that are not related with COVID, but still touch the topics of trauma, mental health, healing, etc. Is it insensitive, or is it it will not be viewed now, or you think it's still something to consider?
Well, I know on the SDN website, we continue to get submissions of projects that have nothing to do with the coronavirus, particularly projects that were in the works prior to this breaking out. So there is important work being done, and we still show that work and are happy to show that work. As Beth said earlier, though, you know, most of the work at the Times right now, in one way or another, is coronavirus related. Although I still see stories, particularly political stories, that really have nothing directly to do with the virus, because, you know, politics still go on everywhere in the world. So there's still that work being done. Although, are you asking specifically about mental health related work, or just anything not coronavirus related, Katya?
Well, particularly I have something mental health and trauma and healing. So it can be, it's not about coronavirus, and I was working for a while on it, but it is connected with what we are living now. So I'm thinking it can be a good opportunity, but also I don't know if it will get attention because people are so overwhelmed with looking for corona stories.
I mean, I think that's a particularly difficult space you're in, because if it is mental health or health related, I think people are going to expect it to be coronavirus related, because you're right in that space where the coronavirus is central. I don't know if Beth or Ed have something else to add to that.
Well, I mean, Beth is the best person to answer this here, but in her place, or not in her place, but you know, I would say, first of all, if it's something you're committed to working on, please continue to work on it. Don't, you know, we have to make sure that while this is we're living in history right now, right? And if we have it, you know, the wherewithal to do it, you know, document in whatever way we can, address it through our work. And whether it has relevance today or it gets out into the world today shouldn't be like the obsessive main point, right? It's, you know, we're documenting for now, but also for posterity, for history. But if this is something that you're sincerely committed to, you just have to keep on working on it. And I do think that there's an appetite for stories that are not related to coronavirus, you know, absolutely. And I've heard that from a couple of editors, but now granted, your project sounds still pretty serious, dealing with trauma. So this might not be exactly the right time for it, you know, but I don't know. I'd love to hear what Beth has to say.
Yeah, I mean, I want to second what Ed said about the importance of continuing to do the work, because this will come to an end. And, you know, things will return to some semblance of normalcy, right? I mean, the landscape's going to look different, obviously, on the economic front, but you know, it's important to keep telling stories that are important to you and that you think are important for the world to see. Also, I mean, I didn't want to, I'm sorry if I made like a sweeping statement early that we're only doing coronavirus stuff. We're not. I mean, we're still doing like foreign dispatches, and which are kind of like small journals and you know, stories from different places. But I do think to agree with Glenn's point that, like, if you're operating in a zone that is health related, that's probably a harder sell right now, because so much of this story, all of this story is either health or economic, right? So I think it's going to be a little harder to get that in front of someone. And somebody else mentioned Visora. earlier too. I mean, it's just a great place. I look at it all the time to see what's out there and what people are working on. We don't necessarily find a home for it, but you'd be surprised. I mean, you know, Exposures, which we run out of Opinion Editorial, is also a really good place for, I don't know if everyone's aware of it, a really good place for like alternative stories as well, that don't have to be Corona related at all. So there are places for them.
All right, well, thank you for that question. All right, so we're going to end the Q&A now and do something experimental, go into breakout rooms. First, we're going to end the live video feed. So I'd like to thank everybody who's been following us on YouTube. And we're going to end that now.